The crystal chandeliers of Étoile cast their warm glow across the dining room like scattered diamonds. It was 8:30 on a Friday evening, and the restaurant hummed with the quiet elegance that only money could buy. Waiters glided between tables in perfectly pressed black uniforms, their movements choreographed to near perfection. At table 14, near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, sat Marcus Halford, tech billionaire, venture capitalist, and according to Forbes, the 23rd richest man in America. His voice carried across the dining room, sharp and cutting. "This is unacceptable. Completely unacceptable." Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the pianist in the corner seemed to falter, his fingers hesitating on the keys. Standing beside table 14, holding a wine bottle with trembling hands, was a young woman in her late 20s. Her name was Elena Petrov, and in approximately 90 seconds, she would say something that would change her life forever. Elena had never imagined herself here, in one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, serving people whose monthly wine budgets exceeded her annual salary. She was 28 years old, living in a cramped studio apartment in Queens, working 2 jobs, and drowning in student loan debt from a linguistics degree that hadn't opened nearly as many doors as she'd hoped. But Étoile paid well, better than any other restaurant she'd worked at, and the tips from wealthy clientele could sometimes cover an entire month's rent in a single evening. The restaurant itself was a temple to excess. Nestled on the 42nd floor of a gleaming tower in Midtown, Étoile boasted 2 Michelin stars, a waiting list that stretched 6 months, and a wine cellar worth more than most people's homes. The dining room featured imported Italian marble, hand-blown Murano glass chandeliers, and tables set with Limoges porcelain that cost more per plate than Elena made in a week. Chef Guillaume Renard, who trained under legends in Paris and Lyon, ran the kitchen with military precision and volcanic temperament. Every morning, Elena arrived 2 hours before her shift. She polished wine glasses until they gleamed like diamonds under the chandelier light, memorized the evening specials in excruciating detail, and practiced pronouncing obscure French wine regions until her accent was flawless. She learned that, in fine dining, everything mattered. How you held a plate, how you poured wine, how you moved through the dining room without drawing attention to yourself. You were supposed to be invisible until needed, attentive without being intrusive, gracious even when faced with cruelty. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. She'd worked at Étoile for 7 months now, long enough to recognize the patterns. The couples celebrating anniversaries who'd saved for months to afford one perfect evening. The corporate executives closed million-dollar deals over Dover Sole and Chateau Margaux. The celebrities hiding behind designer sunglasses, hoping for discretion. And then there were the billionaires, men and women so wealthy that money had lost all meaning, who treated service workers like furniture that occasionally malfunctioned. Outside of work, Elena's life looked nothing like the opulence she served. Her studio apartment in Queens was barely large enough for a bed and a desk. She'd furnished it with finds from thrift stores and sidewalk discards, making it cozy with plants she'd propagated from cuttings and books she'd collected over years. She shared a bathroom down the hall with 3 other tenants. Her refrigerator hummed too loudly and her radiator clanked through winter nights. But it was hers, paid for by hours on her feet and a smile she'd perfected even when her body screamed for rest. Her second job was teaching English as a second language at a community center in Astoria. 3 nights a week, after her restaurant shifts or before them depending on the schedule, she'd help immigrants practice pronunciation, understand idioms, navigate the bewildering complexity of English grammar. It was work she loved, work that felt meaningful, but it paid a fraction of what she made at Étoile. The combination of both jobs barely kept her afloat in a city that devoured money like a beast that could never be satisfied. Elena's gift for languages had always been her escape. As a child growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn, the daughter of Russian immigrants, she discovered early that words were magic. Her parents spoke Russian at home, her friends spoke English and Spanish on the streets, and she'd absorbed languages like a sponge absorbs water. In high school, she'd added French and Italian. In college, she studied German and Mandarin. By the time she graduated with her linguistics degree, she could speak 7 languages with varying degrees of fluency: English, Russian, Spanish, French, Italian, German, and Mandarin. But the degree that was supposed to open doors had mostly led to closed ones. Translation agencies wanted certifications she couldn't afford to obtain. International corporations wanted years of experience she didn't have. The United Nations had a waiting list of qualified applicants that stretched into the thousands. So she'd ended up here, using her French to describe coco vin and her Italian to explain the provenance of burrata, serving people who wouldn't remember her name even if she told them. Tonight had started like any other Friday. The reservation book was completely full, with 3 VIP tables marked in red. Table 14 was one of them, reserved under the name Halford, with a note that read simply, "High priority, best service." Elena hadn't been assigned to that table initially. That honor had gone to James, a veteran server who'd worked at Étoile for 5 years and knew how to handle difficult guests with diplomatic grace. But James had called in sick an hour before service, his voice raspy with flu, leaving the floor manager scrambling to reassign tables. Elena watched as he scanned the dining room, calculating who could handle the additional pressure. His eyes settled on her. "Elena, you're taking table 14. The Halford party. 3 guests, 8:30 reservations. They just arrived." Her stomach had clenched. She'd heard the name Marcus Halford before. Everyone had. He'd made his fortune in artificial intelligence, selling predictive analytics software to everyone from hedge funds to governments. His company, Halford Systems, had gone public 3 years ago in one of the largest tech IPOs in history. He was worth an estimated $11 billion. He was also notorious for being impossible to please. She'd approached table 14 with her practice smile firmly in place, menu in hand, ready to deliver the flawless service that Étoile demanded. Marcus Halford was exactly as his photos suggested. Late 40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, with steel gray hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd never heard the word no without being able to buy a yes. Beside him sat 2 other men, younger, nervous, clearly subordinates trying to impress their boss. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Étoile. My name is Elena, and I'll be taking care of you this evening." Her voice was warm, professional, perfectly calibrated. "May I start you with something from our cocktail menu? Or would you prefer to see our wine list?" Halford didn't look up from his phone. His thumbs moved across the screen with rapid precision, firing off messages to people who probably jumped when they saw his name appear. "Wine list. Something French. Something expensive. And be quick about it. I don't have all night." The 2 other men exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. Elena's smile never wavered. "Of course, sir. I'll be right back with our selection." She returned with the leather-bound wine list, its pages heavy with options that ranged from merely expensive to absolutely astronomical. "We have an excellent Chateau Lafite Rothschild from 2005, or if you prefer Burgundy, a Domaine de la Romanée-Conti that our sommelier particularly recommends." Halford barely glanced at the list. "The Romanée-Conti, 2009. Don't bother with the tasting. Just pour." Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. The 2009 Domaine de la Romanée-Conti was one of the most expensive bottles in their cellar, priced at $4,800. She'd served it only twice before, both times to guests who'd spent half an hour discussing its merits with the sommelier. Halford had ordered it like he was requesting tap water. She retrieved the bottle from the temperature-controlled cellar, handling it with the reverence such a wine demanded. When she returned to present it, showing Halford the label for his approval, he waved her off impatiently. "I can read. Just open it and pour." The meal proceeded from there, each course a small exercise in endurance. Halford sent back his amuse-bouche because the temperature wasn't precisely to his liking. He complained that the lighting at his table was inadequate. He snapped his fingers to get her attention, something that made her jaw clench even as she maintained her serene expression. Through it all, his 2 companions remained silent, nodding agreement with everything their boss said, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, treating Elena with the same dismissive indifference he did. She'd handled difficult guests before. The hedge fund manager who'd sent back his steak 3 times. The celebrity who'd demanded that the entire staff sign NDAs before she'd even sit down. The elderly widow who'd complained about everything from the salt content in the bread to the thread count of the napkins. Elena had learned to let it all wash over her, to smile and nod and apologize even when she'd done nothing wrong. It was part of the job. The price of working in fine dining. The cost of making enough money to survive in New York. But Marcus Halford was different. There was something in his eyes, a cold calculation that suggested he enjoyed making people uncomfortable. He didn't just want service, he wanted submission. He wanted Elena to understand, without ever saying it explicitly, that she was beneath him, that her job was to anticipate his needs and disappear when she'd fulfilled them, that her entire existence in his world was conditional and easily terminated. The breaking point came during the main course. Chef Renard had prepared a masterpiece. Duck breast with cherry gastrique, served with baby turnips and a potato puree so light it was almost ethereal. Elena had delivered it to the table with careful precision, placing it before Halford with the kind of quiet elegance that fine dining demanded. "Your duck, sir. The chef recommends it be enjoyed medium rare. Please let me know if you need anything else." She'd stepped back, ready to give him space to eat, when his voice stopped her cold. "This is medium." Elena paused. "I'm sorry, sir? This duck is medium, not medium rare. I specifically said I wanted it medium rare." His voice was rising now, loud enough that nearby tables were starting to take notice. "Is it really so difficult to follow simple instructions? Do I need to come back to the kitchen and cook it myself?" Elena looked at the duck. It was very clearly medium rare. She'd worked with Chef Renard long enough to know that he was fanatical about temperatures, that every protein that left his kitchen had been measured with precision thermometers to ensure perfection. "Sir, I assure you the duck is prepared exactly to Chef Renard's specifications for medium rare. If you'd prefer it cooked differently, I'd be happy to." "Don't tell me what I'm looking at." Halford cut her off, his voice sharp as broken glass. "I know what medium looks like. This is wrong. Take it back. And bring me something that's actually competently prepared." The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Elena felt heat rising to her cheeks, felt the eyes of every diner in the room boring into her back. But she maintained her composure, nodding gracefully. "Of course, sir. My apologies. I'll have the chef prepare another one immediately." She lifted the plate, turned to leave, and that's when it happened. Marcus Halford, perhaps frustrated by her calm response, perhaps simply unable to resist demonstrating his power one more time, switched languages. He turned to his 2 companions and began speaking in what he clearly believed was a private code, a language that the waitress in front of him couldn't possibly understand. He spoke in German, his words cutting and cruel. "Look at this incompetent girl," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "They hire these pretty but empty-headed servers and expect them to work in a real restaurant. She probably barely finished high school. I bet she can't even spell duck, let alone describe how it should be cooked. Just another pretty face with nothing behind it. It's pathetic, really, how they let people like this into establishments like Étoile." His companions laughed, nervous and uncertain, but laughing nonetheless. They looked at Elena with pitying superiority, secure in their shared secret, their private joke at her expense. What Marcus Halford didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Elena's grandmother had been German, that Elena had spent every summer of her childhood in Hamburg, learning the language from native speakers, that she'd studied German literature at university, reading Goethe and Kafka in their original language, that German was, after Russian and English, the language she spoke most fluently. She understood every word. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The cruel German words hung in the air like poison, invisible to everyone else in the restaurant, but burning into Elena's consciousness with perfect, devastating clarity. Every syllable had landed precisely where Halford intended. A direct assault on her intelligence, her worth, her very humanity. She stood there, the rejected plate of duck still in her hands, feeling something crack deep inside her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd been insulted by a customer. It wasn't even the first time someone had assumed she was stupid, because she wore a server's uniform. But there was something about hearing it in German, in a language Halford believed gave him immunity from consequence, that made it different. He hadn't just insulted her. He tried to erase her, to reduce her to a pretty face with nothing behind it, all while believing she was too ignorant to even know she was being degraded. Elena had spent her entire life swallowing her pride. She'd smiled through condescension from professors who'd questioned whether someone from her background really belonged in their advanced linguistics seminars. She'd nodded politely when restaurant managers explained things to her she already knew better than they did. She'd accepted every small humiliation that came with being young, female, and working class in a world designed for people like Marcus Halford. But in this moment, standing in the middle of Étoile with Manhattan glittering beyond the windows and the weight of 7 languages in her mind, something shifted. She thought about her grandmother, who'd survived the bombing of Hamburg and rebuilt her life from rubble. She thought about her mother, who'd immigrated to America with nothing and worked 3 jobs to give Elena opportunities. She thought about every hour she'd spent studying, every language she'd mastered, every time she'd proven that intelligence had nothing to do with wealth or privilege. And she made a decision. Elena set the plate down on a nearby service station with careful precision. She turned back to table 14, where Marcus Halford sat with his smug smile, still chuckling with his companions about their private joke. She walked back to the table, her posture straight, her head held high. When she spoke, her voice was calm, clear, and utterly devastating. She spoke in perfect, flawless German. "Sir," she began, her accent impeccable, her grammar precise. "I understood every word you just said, and I'd like to correct a few misconceptions. First, I have a bachelor's degree in linguistics with honors from Columbia University. Second, I speak 7 languages fluently: English, Russian, Spanish, French, Italian, German, and Mandarin. Third, I can absolutely spell duck in all 7 of those languages if you'd like. And fourth, the only incompetence at this table tonight has been your complete inability to recognize a medium-rare duck when it's placed in front of you." She paused, letting the words sink in, watching as the color drained from Halford's face. "But perhaps," she continued, her voice still calm, still professional, "someone with your wealth and education should learn that intelligence isn't measured by bank accounts, and that assuming you're the smartest person in any room simply because you're the richest is a profound mistake. The people who serve you aren't invisible. They're not stupid. They're just working for a living, which is something you might have forgotten how to do." The silence that followed was absolute. The pianist had stopped playing. Every conversation in the restaurant had ceased. Waiters stood frozen mid-step. Diners sat with forks suspended halfway to their mouths. Even the sommelier, emerging from the wine cellar, stopped dead in his tracks. Marcus Halford's face went through a remarkable transformation. First shock, his mouth falling open in disbelief. Then fury, a deep red flush creeping up his neck. His hands clenched into fists on the white tablecloth. His 2 companions looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. "How dare you?" Halford sputtered, finally finding his voice. "Do you have any idea who I am? I could buy this entire restaurant. I could have you fired with 1 phone call. I could destroy your pathetic little career before you even walk out that door." Elena met his eyes without flinching. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Halford, and knowing who you are makes what you said even more disappointing. Someone with your resources, your education, your opportunities should understand that cruelty is never a sign of superiority. It's just cruelty." Before Halford could respond, something unexpected happened. From a table near the windows, a woman began to clap. She was in her 60s, elegantly dressed, dining alone. The applause started slowly, deliberately, and then others joined in. First one table, then another, then another. Within seconds, half the restaurant was applauding Elena's defiance. A younger couple stood up, the woman calling out, "Good for you!" An elderly gentleman raised his wine glass in a silent toast. Even some of the other servers were nodding, their professional masks slipping just enough to show solidarity. The tide had turned, and Marcus Halford, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, found himself on the losing side of public opinion. The floor manager, a precise man named Philippe who'd worked in fine dining for 30 years, materialized beside the table. His face was a mask of diplomatic concern, though Elena could see a glimmer of something else in his eyes. Pride, perhaps, or satisfaction. "Mr. Halford," Philippe said smoothly, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we should." "There's no misunderstanding," Halford snapped, shoving back his chair and standing abruptly. "This is completely unacceptable. Your server just humiliated me in front of the entire restaurant. I want her fired. Immediately. And I want the owner's personal apology, or I'll make sure every publication in New York knows about the kind of staff you employ here." Philippe's expression didn't change. "Mr. Halford, I heard what was said in German. I am also fluent, and while I apologize for any discomfort you're experiencing, I must respectfully suggest that the humiliation you're feeling is largely self-inflicted." The color in Halford's face deepened to purple. He grabbed his phone from the table, nearly knocking over the $4,800 bottle of wine. "This isn't over. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. And you," he pointed at Elena, his fingers shaking with rage, "you just made the biggest mistake of your life." He stormed toward the exit, his two companions scrambling after him, mumbling apologies to no one in particular. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, and for a moment, the entire restaurant remained frozen in the aftermath of the confrontation. Then the applause started again, louder this time, accompanied by cheers and raised glasses. Elena stood in the middle of it all, her heart pounding, her hands trembling, suddenly aware of what she'd just done. She'd stood up to one of the richest men in America. She'd called him out in front of dozens of witnesses. She'd probably just destroyed her career at Étoile, possibly in the entire fine dining industry. But she'd also told the truth. Philippe touched her elbow gently. "Elena, come with me. We need to talk." She followed him to the small office behind the kitchen, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was beginning to fade, replaced by a cold dread. She needed this job. She couldn't afford to lose this job. What had she been thinking? Philippe closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit. "Elena, that was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've seen in 30 years of restaurant service. Possibly both." "I'm so sorry," she began, but he held up a hand. "Don't apologize. What Mr. Halford said was inexcusable. What you did was extraordinary. However," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "we need to prepare for the consequences. Mr. Halford is a powerful man. He will likely try to make good on his threats. The owner will need to decide how to handle this situation." Elena nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "I understand. I'll resign if it makes things easier." "Absolutely not," came a voice from the doorway. They both turned to find Chef Guillaume Renard standing there, still in his whites, his expression fierce. "That man insulted my duck, insulted my restaurant, and insulted a member of my staff. Elena stays. If the owner disagrees, he can find a new chef." Philippe sighed but smiled faintly. "Guillaume, you can't threaten to quit every time we have a difficult situation. I can and I will. Elena is one of our best servers. She knows every dish, every wine, every detail. And more importantly, she has dignity. Which is more than I can say for that arrogant fool who just stormed out." Renard turned to Elena. "Your duck knowledge was impeccable, by the way. Medium rare, precisely 63 degrees Celsius." He was completely wrong. Despite everything, Elena laughed. A slightly hysterical sound that was part relief and part disbelief at the surreality of her evening. "Go home," Philippe said gently. "Take the rest of the night off. We'll handle the situation with the owner. Come back Monday, and we'll discuss what happens next." Elena changed out of her uniform in a daze, her hands still shaking as she pulled on her jeans and jacket. The other servers clustered around her in the changing room, offering words of support, recounting their own encounters with impossible guests. James, who'd called in sick but had somehow heard about the incident already, texted her a string of congratulatory emojis. She rode the subway back to Queens in a fog, staring at her reflection in the dark window. Had that really just happened? Had she really told off a billionaire in German in the middle of one of Manhattan's finest restaurants? The adrenaline was wearing off now, replaced by exhaustion and a creeping anxiety about what Monday would bring. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Call me when you get home. Are you okay?" Then another from her best friend Mira. "OH my God, you're viral. Check Twitter." Elena's stomach dropped. Viral? What did that mean? She opened Twitter with trembling fingers, and her breath caught in her throat. The top trending hashtag in New York was hashtag 7languages. Below it, a shaky video recorded by someone in the restaurant. The footage was grainy but clear enough. There was Halford, speaking in German. There was Elena, responding with calm devastation. There was applause that followed. The video had been posted an hour ago. It already had 2 million views. The comments were overwhelming. "This is what standing up to bullies looks like. She's my hero. Everyone should learn to speak 7 languages just to shut down jerks like this. Marcus Halford, you just got schooled by a waitress and I am here for it." There were critics too, of course. "So unprofessional. Servers should stay in their place. Halford should sue for defamation. This is why I always tip poorly." They're all entitled. But the supportive voices far outnumbered the critics. By the time Elena reached her apartment, she had 3,000 new followers on social media, 200 direct messages, and 5 voicemails from people claiming to be journalists or producers. She sat on her bed, still wearing her coat, staring at her phone in disbelief. Her life had changed in the span of 2 minutes. She'd stood up for herself, defended her intelligence and dignity, and somehow it had resonated with millions of people. But she still had no idea if she had a job on Monday, if she'd ever work in a fine dining restaurant again, or if Marcus Halford's lawyers were already drafting papers to sue her into oblivion. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The weekend passed in a blur. The video continued to spread across social media, jumping from Twitter to Instagram to TikTok to Facebook. News outlets picked it up. Local New York stations ran segments. A clip appeared on a morning show with a cheerin reading "Waitress speaks 7 languages to shut down rude billionaire." Elena's phone never stopped buzzing. Interview requests from podcasts, morning shows, magazines. Messages of support from people who'd had similar experiences. Stories from other service workers who'd been belittled and dismissed. A particularly moving email from a young woman studying linguistics who said Elena had inspired her not to give up on her degree. There were also messages from lawyers, both friendly and threatening. 2 law firms offered to represent her pro bono if Halford sued. One legal team, presumably working for Halford, sent a cease and desist letter demanding she stop defaming their client and issue a public apology. Elena ignored them all. On Saturday afternoon, as she was attempting to do laundry and ignore the chaos on her phone, she received a call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Elena Petrov?" The voice was crisp, professional, and female. "Speaking. My name is Catherine Monroe. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer at Meridian Global Solutions. Have you heard of us?" Elena's heart skipped. Meridian Global Solutions was one of the largest international consulting firms in the world, with offices in over 60 countries. They worked with governments, multinational corporations, NGOs. "Yes, of course. We've been following your story with great interest. Your linguistic abilities and your composure under pressure are exactly what we look for in our international relations consultants. We'd like to offer you an interview for a position in our New York office. The role would involve translation, cultural consultation, and client relations for our European and Asian accounts. The starting salary is $135,000, plus benefits and travel allowances." Elena sat down hard on her bed. $135,000. More than twice what she made combining both her current jobs. Enough to pay off her student loans. Enough to move to a better apartment. Enough to finally stop living paycheck to paycheck. Yes, she managed. Yes. I'd be very interested in interviewing. Excellent. Can you come on Monday at 10? Monday at 10. When she was supposed to find out if she still had a job at Étoile. Yes, that works. After she hung up, Elena sat in stunned silence. The confrontation that she'd thought might destroy her career had instead opened a door she'd been trying to pry open for years. The moment of standing up for herself had somehow become the moment her life changed. But the strangest call came Sunday evening. The number had a Manhattan area code but wasn't one she recognized. When she answered, a smooth male voice said, "Is this Elena Petrov?" The linguist who told off Marcus Halford. "This is Elena." She was wary now after dozens of strange calls. "My name is David Chun. I'm Marcus Halford's former business partner. We parted ways 3 years ago under less than pleasant circumstances. I just wanted to call and say thank you." "Thank you." Chun laughed. A genuine sound. Marcus has been insufferable for years. Watching someone finally put him in his place, in perfect German no less, was the most satisfying thing I've seen in a decade. I wanted you to know that not everyone in the tech world is like him. Some of us actually remember what it's like to work for a living. They talked for 20 minutes. Chun told her about his own company, a startup focused on ethical AI development. He offered her a consulting position helping them develop multilingual AI interfaces. Another opportunity, another door opening. When she finally fell asleep that night, Elena's mind was spinning with possibilities. Her phone had 17% battery left and 400 unread messages. Outside her window, Queens hummed with its usual cacophony of sirens and voices and distant music. Everything had changed, and yet somehow everything was still exactly the same. Monday morning arrived with surprising brightness. Elena dressed carefully for her interview at Meridian Global, choosing her best blazer, the one she'd bought at a consignment shop in Brooklyn. Before heading to the interview, she stopped by Étoile. She needed to know where she stood. The restaurant was closed for lunch prep, but Philippe had told her to come by before 10. She found him in the office with the owner, a man named Robert Beaumont who rarely appeared at the restaurant, preferring to manage his small empire of fine dining establishments from a distance. Beaumont was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of quiet authority that came from decades in the hospitality industry. He stood when Elena entered, extending his hand. "Miss Petrov, I've been wanting to meet you. Please sit." Elena's palms were sweating. This was it. The moment when she'd find out if she'd destroyed everything. "I've spent the weekend," Beaumont began, fielding calls about the incident on Friday night. Calls from journalists, from other restaurant owners, from the board of the Restaurant Association. "I've also received 3 calls from Marcus Halford's lawyers, 2 from his PR team, and 1 from Mr. Halford himself." Elena's heart sank. "They want you fired, of course. They've threatened legal action, negative publicity, every form of retaliation they could think of. Mr. Halford was particularly emphatic that we make an example of you." "I understand," Elena said quietly. "I'll resign if it makes things easier." Beaumont held up a hand. "I haven't finished. I've also received over 2,000 emails and calls from customers, both current and former, expressing their support for you and their disgust at Mr. Halford's behavior. Our reservations for the next 3 months have tripled. We have people calling who've never been to Étoile before, asking specifically if they might be served by this 7-language waitress." He paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Miss Petrov, in 30 years of running restaurants, I've learned that there are 2 types of customers. Those who treat staff with respect, and those who don't. The second type, no matter how wealthy, are not worth having. We don't want Marcus Halford's business. We don't want people like Marcus Halford in our establishment." Elena felt tears welling up. "You're not fired, Miss Petrov. In fact, if you're willing to stay, I'd like to offer you a promotion to senior server and a 20% raise. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of intelligence, composure, and dignity that Étoile values." "Thank you, Mr. Beaumont. That's incredibly generous. But I should tell you I have a job interview in an hour for a position that pays significantly more than I make here. Even with the raise." Beaumont nodded, unsurprised. I suspected as much. This viral moment has given you opportunities you wouldn't have had otherwise. I won't pretend we can compete with corporate salaries. But the offer stands whether you stay full-time or part-time, or decide to leave entirely. You'll always have a place at Étoile. Elena left the restaurant with tears streaming down her face, though whether they were from relief or gratitude or simple overwhelming emotion, she couldn't say. The interview at Meridian Global went better than she'd dared hope. Catherine Monroe was impressed not just by her linguistic abilities but by her composure during the viral incident. "We work with high-pressure clients constantly," Monroe explained. "The fact that you maintained professionalism, even while defending yourself, tells us you can handle difficult situations with grace." They offered her the job on the spot. $135,000 a year. Full benefits. 3 weeks vacation. The opportunity to travel. To use all 7 of her languages professionally. To finally step into the career she dreamed of during all those years of study. She accepted. That evening, Elena stood in her tiny Queens apartment, looking around at the thrift store furniture and the plants and the stacks of books. Soon she'd be able to afford a better place. Soon she'd be able to help her mother retire. Soon she'd pay off her student loans and start saving money. An impossible dream for so long. Her phone buzzed. Another message, one of hundreds. But this one made her smile. It was from a young woman in California. "I'm a waitress studying linguistics at community college. I almost dropped out because people kept telling me it was useless. Your video gave me hope. Thank you for showing us that intelligence doesn't have a dress code." Elena typed back, "Never let anyone make you feel small because of how you earn your living. Keep studying. Keep learning. Your voice matters in every language." She thought about Marcus Halford, probably still furious in his penthouse somewhere, surrounded by wealth that couldn't buy back his dignity. She thought about all the servers and cashiers and retail workers who'd reached out to her over the weekend, sharing their own stories of being dismissed and underestimated. She thought about her grandmother in Hamburg, her mother in Brooklyn, all the women who'd worked and struggled and refused to be diminished. The viral video would eventually fade. The news cycle would move on. But the message would remain. That respect isn't something you can buy. That intelligence exists everywhere if you're willing to see it. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept someone else's limited view of who you are. Elena Petrov had walked into Étoile 7 months ago as just another server trying to survive in an impossible city. She was walking out as proof that dignity has nothing to do with net worth, and that the courage to speak up in any language could change everything. Thank you for reading. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.